Dust rolled across the town of Dry Creek like smoke from an unseen fire, settling on the rooftops, the horses, and the tired faces of folks who'd seen too many summers come and go. It was near midday when two riders appeared on the horizon, their silhouettes sharp against the sun. The moment they entered town, heads began to turn. They were twins, though anyone with eyes could tell them apart once they got close. Luke Carson rode straight, backed and quiet, the kind of man whose stillness carried weight. Levy Carson rode loose in the saddle, easy smile beneath his hat brim, the kind of man who made strangers want to trust him and regret it later. Their horses were dusty, their coats sun-faded, but both men carried themselves with the surety of people who knew exactly who they were. They'd been gone from Dry Creek for years, off working cattle drives and mending fences from Texas to Wyoming, and now they were back with little more than their saddlebags and the same hard-earned grit that had kept them alive. At the far end of Main Street stood the whitewashed building of the First Territorial Bank. On its porch, sweeping dust from the steps, was Clara Whitfield, the banker's daughter. She was dressed too fine for ranch life, pale cotton dress, hair pinned neat despite the wind, but her eyes held a quiet curiosity, the kind that made her seem older than her years. When she looked up and saw the twins, her broom paused mid-sweep. The taller one, Luke, though she didn't know his name yet, tipped his hat in greeting. The other, Levy, gave a grin that could have lit up the whole street. Clara's cheeks warmed in spite of herself. She quickly turned back to her sweeping, though her heart beat faster than before. Inside the bank, her father, Mr. Whitfield, had been watching from behind the window. The Carson boys, he muttered, frowning. Good hands when they want to be, but trouble tends to find them. He didn't say it aloud, but he hoped they'd keep their distance, especially from his daughter. Later that afternoon, the twins stepped into the bank's shaded doorway, hats in hand. Clara glanced up from her father's desk as Luke spoke. "Sir, we heard you might be lookin' for help out at your ranch. Fences down, herds scattered some. Mr." Whitfield studied them a long moment. "You boys plan to stay out of trouble this time." Levy smiled. "That depends on how much trouble you got to spare." Luke shot him a look that said don't push it, then added, "We just want steady work, sir. Nothin' more." The banker sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I need men who can ride and mend and keep quiet about it. You fit the bill. Report to the foreman tomorrow morning. Wages every Saturday." "Much obliged," Luke said. As they turned to leave, Clara couldn't help but watch the way they moved. Graceful, sure, and maybe just a little too confident. Levy caught her glance and winked. Luke didn't, but there was something in his eyes, calm and unreadable, that made her blush all the same. By sundown, word had spread that the Carson twins were back working for the banker. The ranch hands talked over cards, wondering how long they'd last this time. Clary sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the cottonwoods, pretending to read a book while her thoughts drifted to those new hires. When she saw two figures walking their horses toward the bunkhouse, she set her book down. Levy was saying something that made Luke shake his head, but both turned at once when they reached the yard and found her watching. Levy lifted a hand in a lazy salute. Luke just nodded, a polite sort of acknowledgement, but there was something in the air between them, a quiet charge that made her pulse skip. She told herself it was foolishness, just curiosity about newcomers, nothing more. But as the twins disappeared into the twilight, the world felt a little different, quieter, sharper, as though everything that had been still and predictable in Dry Creek had just shifted, and she didn't yet know how. The summer days rolled long and hot across the Whitfield ranch. The air shimmered over the pasture by noon, and the only sound was the low murmur of cattle and the rhythmic clink of tools. Luke and Levy Carson had settled into the work quickly, earning nods from the older hands and cautious approval from the foreman. They rode hard, fixed what was broken, and never complained, though each man carried a different kind of silence. Clara saw them often now, though she pretended not to notice how much she looked forward to it. She brought baskets of food to the ranch hands when her father sent her out, or carried cold water in the afternoons when the sun burned hottest. She told herself it was only duty, but the truth ran deeper. She liked to see how they worked, how they spoke to one another without words, how they carried the dust, and the day like it belonged to them. Luke always thanked her first. "Much obliged, Miss Whitfield," he'd say, his voice steady and low. His eyes met hers only briefly, but there was something in them that lingered even after he turned away. Levy, on the other hand, always made her laugh. He'd tip his hat and say something like, "You're a sight for sore eyes and sorer backs," until she'd scold him, half smiling despite herself. One evening, Clara took a walk down by the pasture fence. The air smelled of sage and cut grass, and the last of the sunlight spread over the land like spilled honey. She saw Luke there, sleeves rolled up, driving a new post into the ground. His motions were sure, strong, patient, like a man who'd learned that every good thing took time. "You work later than anyone I've ever met," she said softly. He turned, startled, but smiled when he saw her. "Fence won't fix itself. You could leave it for tomorrow," she said, walking closer. "I could," he said, setting down his hammer, "but then I'd just have to look at it all night knowing it wasn't done right." Clara smiled at that, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "My father says the same about his ledgers." "Then maybe your father and I understand each other," Luke said. There was a quiet moment after that, not awkward but full of something unspoken. The wind picked up, brushing against her skirt and carrying the faint scent of horses and dust. Luke looked like he wanted to say something more, but instead he just nodded. "You'd best head back before dark, Miss Whitfield. Coyotes come out soon." She almost said she wasn't afraid, that she'd walked this land all her life, but something in his tone made her listen. She turned to go, then glanced back once more. Luke was already working again, the steady thud of his hammer keeping rhythm with the fading light. That night, after supper, she stepped onto the porch to watch the stars come out. The air was cooler, the kind that carried the scent of sage and campfire smoke from the bunkhouse in the distance. She heard footsteps, light and familiar, and then Levy's voice beside her. "You've got the best seat in town," he said, leaning against the porch rail. Clara smiled without looking at him. "It's quiet here. I like it that way." "Quiet can be lonely," Levy said. "Out on the trail, we'd talk to the stars just to feel like someone was listening." She looked at him then, catching the reflection of the lantern light in his eyes. "And what do the stars say back?" He grinned. "Depends on who's asking." Clara laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "Maybe," he said, his grin fading into something gentler. "But I mean it. You shouldn't always be up here alone." They stood side by side in silence, watching as the stars brightened, thick and bright over the open land. For a moment, it felt as though the whole world had gone still, just the soft breath of the wind and the steady beat of her heart. When she finally went inside, Clara lingered at her window. From there, she could see the faint glow of the bunkhouse lamps and two figures sitting outside, one still, one gesturing as he talked. She couldn't hear them, but she could feel the space between them, heavy with something that was no longer just brotherly. Luke's gaze was turned toward the house. Levy's laughter carried softly through the night. Clara lay awake long after the lamps went out, her thoughts tangled like prairie grass in the wind. She told herself it was foolishness, that she barely knew them, but her heart, stubborn, curious, and newly awakened, told a different story. And out in the bunkhouse, the Carson twins sat in silence for a long while, neither of them willing to say aloud what they both already knew. They were falling for the same woman. Autumn came early that year. The wind carried a cooler edge, and the grass around Dry Creek took on the color of gold left too long in the sun. The air felt different, too expectant, somehow, as if the land itself was waiting for something to happen. The Carson twins had been working for the Whitfields nearly 3 months, and in that time the ranch had settled into its best shape in years. The fences were mended, the herds were strong, and even Mr. Whitfield had to admit the brothers were good men, hard men, yes, but fair, reliable. Clara saw them nearly every day, though she tried to pretend it didn't matter. Sometimes she'd find Luke in the fields before sunrise, quiet as the dawn, his breath visible in the chill. Other times, Levy would show up at the porch with a wildflower or a teasing remark that left her smiling long after he'd gone. She couldn't name what had changed in her heart, only that both brothers had settled into it, each in his own way. But whispers traveled fast in small towns, and people had begun to talk. Old Mrs. Cooper, who ran the general store, had seen Clara walking by the river with one of the twins, she couldn't say which, and by week's end, the story had grown like wildfire. Mr. Whitfield heard it from a man in town and came home that evening with storm clouds in his eyes. Clara was sitting by the window when he found her. "Clara," he said, voice sharp as a whip, "you haven't been keeping company with those Carson boys, have you?" She turned slowly, hands folded in her lap. "I've spoken with them, that's all." He gave a bitter laugh. "Spoken with them? Lord help me, girl, you don't know what kind of men they are. Cowboys like that, they'll charm you for a season and ride off the next. They're not like that." She said softly, "You don't know them, and you do." He shot back, "You think they'll marry you, a banker's daughter? Don't be foolish, Clara. You were raised better than this." The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they came from the man who'd always told her she deserved the best. She wanted to argue, to tell him that the world was bigger than ledgers and reputation, but the look in his eyes told her it wouldn't matter. He'd already made up his mind. That night, unable to sleep, she slipped out of the house and walked toward the pastures. The moon hung low and full over the plains, lighting her path. When she reached the fence line, she found both Luke and Levy there, standing side by side like they'd been waiting. Neither looked surprised to see her. "Your father came by the barn earlier," Luke said quietly. "Told us it'd be best if we moved on after the season." Her heart dropped. "He can't do that. You've done nothing wrong." Levy gave a small, rueful smile. "Sometimes that don't matter much, sweetheart. Folks see what they want to see." Clara looked from one brother to the other, the weight of it all pressing on her chest. "I never meant for this to happen. You've both been so kind to me, and now—" Luke stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "You don't have to explain, Clara. We know." She searched his face, then Levy's. They were so different, yet bound by something deeper than blood. And she realized, with a clarity that startled her, that she loved them both not the same way, but truly. One was safety and steadiness, the other fire and freedom. How could she choose between the two halves of the same heartbeat? Tears stung her eyes. "I wish I could tell you what's right. I wish I knew." Levy reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Don't cry for us. We've had our share of goodbyes." Luke's hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm and certain. "You'll do just fine, Clara. You've got the strength for it." She wanted to tell them to stay, to fight her father's disapproval, to make some impossible promise that things could work out. But the words wouldn't come. Some things in life weren't meant to be forced. As dawn began to break, she stood at the edge of the road and watched them mount their horses. The sky turned rose, colored and soft, brushing the horizon in light. Levy looked back first, smiling like he always did, though there was sadness in it now. "Take care of yourself, darlin'. Don't let this place shrink you." Luke gave her a single nod, quiet, certain. "You'll remember us." "I'll remember everything," she whispered. And then they were gone, riding east toward the rising sun, two silhouettes fading into the light. Clara stood there long after the sound of their horses disappeared, her heart aching but strangely free. Her father found her later on the porch, eyes red but calm. He said nothing, just stood beside her, looking out at the road. After a while she spoke, voice soft as a prayer. "You were right, Father, they did leave." He turned to her, ready to speak, but she shook her head. "It doesn't matter. Some people don't stay forever. But that doesn't mean they weren't worth loving." The wind shifted then, carrying the faint scent of dust and horse, and the echo of distant laughter, or maybe it was only memory. Clara closed her eyes and let it wash over her. The land was wide, and her life was just beginning.